Imagine a sky. Not just any sky, but one suddenly choked, darkened by the sheer force of human will and industrial might. A sky not of blue and white, but of glinting metal, roaring engines, and a relentless, terrifying purpose. This isn't a scene from a dystopian novel. This was a reality witnessed by millions on a single, pivotal day during World War II. It was the day over 1,000 American bombers descended upon Berlin, the very heart of Hitler's empire, in broad daylight. This wasn't merely an attack, it was a defiant declaration, a strategic gamble forged in the crucible of earlier defeats and powered by an unparalleled surge of ingenuity and sacrifice. For years, the Allies had grappled with the brutal efficacy of strategic bombing. The idea was simple in theory. Cripple the enemy's industrial capacity, break their will to fight, and bring the war to their doorstep without a costly ground invasion. But the reality, especially for American daylight bombing, had been anything but simple. The early campaigns were etched in blood and despair. Places like Schweinfurt and Regensburg became synonymous with unimaginable losses. Picture this: vast formations of B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 liberators, lumbering giants armed with precision bombs venturing deep into enemy territory. They were magnificent, yet terribly vulnerable. Without adequate escort, these formations were picked apart, savaged by swarms of German fighters and torn asunder by relentless anti-aircraft fire, known chillingly as flak. Hundreds of young men, many barely out of their teens, disappeared into the European skies, leaving behind grieving families and a profound doubt about the viability of daylight precision bombing. The casualty rates were horrendous, sometimes exceeding 20% on a single mission. To fly 25 missions, a full tour of duty, seemed an almost impossible feat. A dance with death where the music was the drone of engines and the sudden, terrifying percussion of exploding shells. Yet, despite these devastating setbacks, the American resolve never wavered. In fact, it only intensified. This wasn't just about stubbornness. It was a calculated escalation driven by a nation's industrial might. While Germany poured resources into a multi-front war, the United States was transforming into the arsenal of democracy on an unprecedented scale. Factories across America, from the industrial heartlands of Michigan to the aircraft plants of California, were churning out planes and armaments with astonishing speed. This wasn't just about replacing lost aircraft. It was about building a strategic advantage that would ultimately overwhelm the Axis powers. And then came the game changer, the P-51 Mustang. This aircraft, a marvel of engineering, equipped with the powerful Rolls-Royce Merlin engine and, crucially, newly developed drop tanks, could finally escort bombers all the way to their targets deep within the Reich, and back. For years, the Achilles heel of daylight bombing had been the limited range of escort fighters. German interceptors would simply wait until the American escorts had to turn back due to fuel constraints, then descend upon the unprotected bomber streams like hungry wolves. The Mustang shattered this dynamic. It gave the bomber crews something they had never truly had before: constant, unwavering protection. The stage was set for a confrontation on an epic scale, a true test of wills and industrial output. And the target? Berlin. Not just any city, but the political and symbolic heart of Nazi Germany. To strike Berlin in broad daylight was to deliver a message to Hitler, to the German people, and to the entire occupied world. Nazi power, despite its boasts of impregnability, could be reached. It could be touched. It could be wounded. The Allied command in England understood the stakes intimately. Berlin was not merely a collection of buildings. It was a pulsating nexus of the German war machine. It housed critical armaments plants, sprawling rail hubs that funneled troops and supplies to every front, and the administrative centers that orchestrated the entire Reich. Adolf Hitler himself, with characteristic bombast, had declared Berlin inviolable, vowing that no enemy bomber would ever penetrate the skies above his capital. This wasn't just military strategy. It was a matter of divine right, of an unshakable belief in his own power and the might of the German homeland. But by early 1944, the tide of resources had undeniably shifted. The relentless output of American factories dwarfed Germany's struggling production, and a steady stream of newly trained air crews arrived in England each month, eager, if apprehensive, to face the enemy. The 8th Air Force, scattered across the English countryside, now possessed the raw strength, the numbers, and the tactical advantage to contemplate an operation of unprecedented audacity. A 1,000-bomber raid on Berlin. The orchestration of Armageddon. The preparations for such a monumental undertaking were a symphony of meticulous planning and sheer brute force, orchestrated across dozens of airfields in East Anglia and the Midlands. In the days leading up to the mission, these tranquil English landscapes were transformed into hives of activity, buzzing with a controlled chaos. Thousands of ground personnel toiled under the cloak of blackout conditions, their movements precise and practiced, loading bomb bays with a deadly cocktail of high explosives and incendiary clusters. These weren't just random munitions. They were specifically designed to cripple German industry and ignite vast, uncontainable fires, turning steel and concrete into an inferno. Engineers, their faces grimy with grease and fatigue, meticulously checked every rivet, every wire, every fuel line. They understood that in the unforgiving environment of high-altitude combat, a single malfunction, a minor oversight, could doom a 10-man crew. The air war over Germany was already a brutal grind of attrition, but this particular day demanded a level of coordination, a convergence of individual efforts never before attempted. This was not merely a raid. It was an aerial armada, a mechanized invasion delivered from the clouds. Briefing rooms, usually stark and functional, became crucibles of tension and ritual. Crews, bleary-eyed from interrupted sleep, clutched their coffee mugs, their faces betraying a mixture of dread and grim determination. A low murmur, a collective intake of breath, always rippled through the room when the commanding officer finally revealed the target. Berlin. For the grizzled veterans, it was the mission they had both feared and silently anticipated, the ultimate test. For the fresh-faced newcomers, it was a baptism by fire, a plunge into the deep end of a war they were only beginning to comprehend. Maps, unfurled across large boards, meticulously traced the planned flight paths. Across the frigid North Sea, over the watchful Dutch coast, and deep into the heavily defended German heartland. Navigators, the quiet mathematicians of the sky, took copious notes, calculating headings, wind drift, and precious fuel burn. Gunners, their hands calloused and strong, cleaned their twin 50-caliber machine guns, rehearsing their arcs of fire, their eyes tracing the attack patterns of Luftwaffe fighters they'd studied in grainy film reels. Pilots and co-pilots drilled endlessly on maintaining the tight combat box formations, for in this disciplined geometric array lay the bomber's only real protection, a bristling porcupine of concentrated firepower. The choice of aircraft for this titanic endeavor was anything but arbitrary. The B-17 Flying Fortress, with its legendary reputation for absorbing punishment and returning home, formed the bulk of the attacking force. It was complemented by the longer-range, heavier-load B-24 Liberators. Together, these two aircraft represented the very essence of American industrial might, a testament to a nation's ability to produce weapons of war on an unprecedented scale. Each was a flying fortress in its own right, bristling with defensive guns, yet each was agonizingly vulnerable when isolated, a fact that underscored the absolute necessity of strict formation discipline. The success of the mission, its very survival, depended not only on the individual skill and courage of each man, but on the collective, seamless ability of hundreds of crews to function as a single, devastating unit. The introduction of long-range escort fighters, specifically the P-51 Mustang, infused the crews with a layer of confidence that had been tragically absent in earlier disastrous raids. The Mustang, powered by its formidable Rolls-Royce Merlin engine and equipped with its revolutionary extended-range drop tanks, could finally accompany the bombers all the way to Berlin and back, engaging German interceptors deep within their own territory. Alongside these aerial guardians flew the robust P-47 Thunderbolts and the distinctive twin-boomed P-38 Lightnings, providing additional layers of protective cover. Fighter pilots received new directives. Their mission was not merely to defend the bombers, but to aggressively seek out German interceptors, dragging them into prolonged, energy-sapping dogfights and denying them the opportunity to launch coordinated, devastating attacks on the bomber stream. The philosophy of air combat was shifting dramatically, from defensive endurance to offensive dominance. The sheer scale of the mission introduced complexities that strained logistical capabilities to their absolute limit. Over 1,000 bombers meant a procession stretching for miles, a metal serpent coiling across the sky. Each squadron was assigned precise takeoff slots, a delicate ballet designed to prevent catastrophic collisions in the crowded British airspace. Timing was paramount. A delay of mere minutes could throw off the entire sequence, leaving stragglers exposed and vulnerable. Radios crackled with coded signals, updated weather reports, and last-minute adjustments. Intelligence officers, their faces grim, warned of possible decoys, false beacons, and the heavy, desperate resistance they expected from Me-109s and FW-190s based around Hanover and Magdeburg. The Luftwaffe, they insisted, would not allow Berlin to be struck without unleashing its full, unholy fury. Yet, despite the looming danger, morale among the American crews remained remarkably high. Jokes echoed through the mess halls, quick letters were scribbled home, and card games were played with forced nonchalance as they awaited the order to man their stations. Beneath the bravado, each man understood the immense stakes. To hit Berlin was to carry the war directly into Hitler's sanctum. The risk of not returning was painfully real, a cold knot in the pit of every stomach. Yet, so too was the profound pride of participating in an operation that would echo across history, a testament to courage and conviction. Dawn's ascent, the Armada takes flight. As dawn broke over the tranquil English countryside, the stillness that had blanketed the land was violently shattered. A deep, guttural thunder began to roll across the fields, the sound of radial engines, hundreds of them roaring to life. One by one, across dozens of airfields, B-17s and B-24s, heavy with bombs and fuel, lumbered from their dispersal points, their propellers, massive, rotating blades sliced through the pale morning haze, kicking up dust and the pungent, unmistakable smell of aviation fuel and oil that clung to the cold air. Mechanics, their faces etched with fatigue and anxiety, waved them forward with signal paddles, their movements precise and practiced. For the young men inside the bombers, the cockpit vibrations were more than just the hum of machinery. They signaled the beginning of a journey that might end in glorious triumph, or, for far too many, never end at all. Takeoff itself, in such massive formations, was a perilous dance. Pilots had to wrestle their heavy, fully armed aircraft into the sky in quick succession, climbing into tight intervals with precious little room for error. The slightest miscalculation, a momentary lapse in concentration, could lead to disaster. Many veterans carried the haunting memory of past accidents, devastating collisions on runways, engines sputtering and failing on takeoff, overloaded bombers crashing tragically into the very fields they had barely left. Every successful liftoff was a small victory, a silent prayer answered. Once airborne, the disparate squadrons began to knit themselves together, a colossal, complex jigsaw puzzle forming in the sky. Aircraft rose into carefully assigned altitudes, merging seamlessly into an unbroken stream. The sight was staggering, even to seasoned veterans. Hundreds of aircraft, their silver bodies glinting in the pale morning light, wings almost overlapping, formed endless rows that stretched to the very horizon. It was a vision of overwhelming, terrifying power. Below them, the English Channel shimmered, a vast, indifferent mirror, as the colossal formation angled eastward. Radio chatter was kept to a minimum, a disciplined silence broken only by essential commands. Gunners, their faces grim, scanned the skies with a nervous intensity, their fingers brushing the triggers of their Browning .50 caliber machine guns. Even in these early, relatively safe stages of the flight, the danger of mid-air collisions loomed large. One misjudged turn, one sudden mechanical failure, and two bombers, their metal bodies locked in a death embrace, could fall together in a fiery spiral, taking 20 lives with them. At the same time, the escort fighters, the swift guardians of the Armada, climbed to their covering positions. Mustangs, Thunderbolts, and Lightnings darted among the slower, more ponderous bombers, weaving intricate protective patterns above and to the flanks. Their speed and agility presented a stark contrast to the lumbering formations they shielded, yet they were bound together in an unbreakable purpose. The bomber crews often glanced upward, a flash of appreciation and renewed confidence whenever they caught sight of their protectors flashing past, the symbols of hope in a darkening sky. As the coast of Britain faded behind them, ahead lay the long silent stretch over the North Sea, a vast, indifferent corridor where the enemy could strike at any moment. Crossing the water, the formation settled into its grim rhythm. Navigators hunched over their charts, their eyes tracing lines, verifying bearings, meticulously guiding the fleet. Bombardiers checked their Norden bomb sights, the advanced targeting system that was meant to deliver precision strikes, a promise of accuracy in the chaotic destruction. In the radio operator's compartment, faint signals ticked through the airwaves, carrying coded updates from command, a tenuous link to the world they'd left behind. Every man had his role, and every role mattered, a crucial cog in the vast, unforgiving machine. With so many aircraft in the air, discipline was not just important, it was everything. A single drifting plane could disrupt the intricate formation, exposing dozens of others to attack, tearing a fatal hole in the protective shield. To the men inside, the mission already felt endless. A seemingly eternal drone of engines, punctuated only by the occasional glance at the fuel gauges and the altimeter. The psychological strain began to mount even before they reached enemy territory. A heavy weight on every mind. The sheer immensity of the task pressing down on them. 1,000 bombers with a single devastating purpose: to strike the capital of the Reich. Veterans knew the next stage would be the most perilous. As soon as they crossed the Dutch coast, German radar would lock on to them, and the Luftwaffe, like a slumbering dragon, would be summoned into the skies. The silence before the storm, the agonizing wait, was its own form of torment. Crews adjusted oxygen masks. At high altitude, the thin, icy air could induce hypoxia, clouding judgment and stealing strength. Gunners flexed their hands, already numb from the freezing air pouring through open turrets. A brutal cold that seeped into the very metal frames of the aircraft. Yet, even amidst the bone-chilling fear, there was awe in what they saw from inside the formations. The sky itself appeared transformed, a man-made constellation, every bomber like a star moving in disciplined, synchronized unison. For some, it was a moment of profound pride, a visceral demonstration of what American factories and manpower could achieve when pushed to their limits. But for others, it was a stark reminder of mortality, a chilling awareness of how small they were, mere specks in the immense, indifferent machinery of war. As the first faint lines of the European coastline began to appear on the horizon, hearts tightened, a collective tightening of resolve and fear. The relative safety of England was behind them. The fire of Germany and all its deadly fury lay ahead. The veil is broken. Germany's skies ignite. As the vast aerial procession reached the European coastline, its scale became almost unfathomable, a phenomenon that defied easy comprehension. To observers on the ground in Holland and northern Germany, the sky appeared transformed into a mechanical river, stretching mile after mile, glittering with sunlight reflecting off thousands of wings and fuselages. Farmers paused their plows, soldiers in their bunkers, and civilians in their homes all stood frozen, watching, as thousands of engines droned in unison, a sound that resonated deep within their chests, a premonition of doom. It was not simply an attack, it was an overwhelming, terrifying display of industrial power, a metallic tide flowing inexorably across the heavens. The bomber stream, layered in multiple altitudes, a living, breathing entity stretching for more than 100 miles, represented an airborne invasion that could neither be hidden nor ignored. German radar stations, sophisticated but ultimately overwhelmed, had already tracked the incoming mass. Operators hunched over their glowing cathode screens, their faces illuminated by the eerie light, transmitted urgent alerts to Luftwaffe control centers. The code words, "Find Verband," "Enemy Formation," echoed through command posts from Bremen to Magdeburg, triggering a frenzied scramble. Radio messages spread outward like wildfire, summoning fighter squadrons to launch. By now, both sides understood the deadly rhythm of such encounters. The Americans knew that once their aircraft penetrated deeper into Germany, interception was not a possibility, but an absolute certainty. A dance with death that would inevitably occur. The Germans, in turn, knew they had only precious minutes to assemble their interceptors into effective attack groups before the bombers reached Berlin itself. Inside the bomber cockpits, crews remained disciplined, their faces taut with tension. Navigators confirmed their courses along designated waypoints, meticulously timing the turns that would keep the colossal stream intact. The sheer complexity was staggering. Hundreds of aircraft flying in overlapping combat boxes, each with strict positioning relative to the others. A single drifting bomber, a moment of disorientation, could disrupt the cohesion of dozens, tearing a fatal hole in the defensive shield and exposing them to enemy attack. Yet, from above, the massive planes appeared as an ordered machine, a deliberate orchestration of speed and geometry, a testament to months of training and a collective will. Commanders had insisted that only with such precision could the formation's defensive firepower be fully effective. A wall of interlocking machine gun fire that no individual fighter could hope to penetrate unscathed. The deeper they flew, the heavier the defenses became. Anti-aircraft batteries along the coast opened fire first, their black puffs of flak blossoming at high altitude, ominous flowers of death against the blue sky. Shells exploded in thunderous bursts, filling the sky with jagged steel fragments, turning the very air into shrapnel. For the crews, flak was both terrifying and utterly impersonal. Unlike fighters, it gave no chance of retaliation, no face to the enemy. Pilots held their courses with grim determination, resisting the instinct to weave and dodge, for breaking formation meant almost certain death. When bursts came close, the entire airframe shuddered violently, rattling teeth and nerves alike, a terrifying percussion against the constant drone of engines. Some aircraft, already limping behind, engines coughing from shrapnel hits, began to fall out of formation, their vulnerability heartbreakingly clear, but the mainstream pressed on relentlessly, a tide of metal and resolve. Meanwhile, in German airfields across the Reich, a frantic scramble was underway. Mechanics, their hands flying, struggled to prepare Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke-Wulf FW 190s for takeoff. Pilots, their faces etched with a mixture of apprehension and grim resolve, ran to their cockpits, pulling on flight gear in desperate haste. Many were veterans of years of brutal combat, their spirits scarred by endless battles over the fatherland, their eyes holding the ghosts of fallen comrades. Yet even they, the elite of the Luftwaffe, could not disguise their apprehension at the sheer, overwhelming scale of what they faced. 1,000 bombers meant 10,000 machine guns bristling from every angle, not to mention the hundreds of aggressive American escort fighters now circling above, ready for a fight. Still, duty demanded engagement. Engines roared to life, a cacophony of sound, and, one by one, the fighters leapt from the runways, clawing upward to meet the invaders, a desperate, valiant, and ultimately doomed effort. The psychological weight on both sides was immense, a crushing burden of fear and expectation. For Berliners, the wail of sirens across the city had become a familiar, chilling soundtrack. Crowds rushed into shelters, clutching their children, their faces pale with terror, while civil defense workers prepared for the infernos that were surely to come. The city's defenses bristled with thousands of flak guns, from the massive 128mm towers that rose like medieval fortresses above the rooftops, to lighter batteries dotting apartment buildings. Berlin's defenders had been promised they could hold back any assault, that their city was impregnable, a bastion of the Reich. But the sheer size of the incoming armada, the endless drone of engines, challenged that belief, shattering the illusion of safety. The Americans, on the other hand, felt both awe and dread as they realized the magnitude of their mission, an undertaking unlike anything in human history. From the lead bombers, crews could already make out smoke columns rising far ahead, signals of burning targets from earlier raids, mixing with the haze of Berlin's vast industrial complexes. The formation held steady, inexorable as a tide, a terrifying, disciplined entity moving with single-minded purpose. Above, the escorts fanned out, their pilots readying themselves for the inevitable, brutal clash with the German fighters. The stage was set. The city of Berlin was only minutes away, and the sky was about to erupt into chaos. The inferno over Berlin, a city ablaze. As the vast bomber armada drew closer to the German capital, the Luftwaffe, in a desperate, final effort, scrambled every available fighter to intercept. From airfields scattered across central Germany, squadrons of Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke-Wulf FWW 190s clawed into the cold March air, climbing steeply toward their rendezvous with the enemy, a dance with death they knew they had to perform. To the German pilots, many of whom had seen years of brutal combat, the scale of the American formation was staggering, almost unbelievable. Veterans who had fought over France and Russia, who knew the sound of engines and the smell of cordite intimately, admitted that nothing in their experience equaled the thunderous roar of more than 1,000 bombers, accompanied by hundreds of aggressive escorts. Over their radios, orders barked from ground controllers, demanding immediate engagement, urging pilots to break the American stream before it reached Berlin's hallowed airspace. For the Luftwaffe, defending Berlin was not merely about military necessity. It was a matter of national pride, of preserving the very symbol of the Reich. Hitler's showcase city, heavily fortified with flak towers that bristled with giant 128mm guns capable of hurling shells miles into the sky, was meant to be impregnable. Yet, even these formidable defenses required time to track, calibrate, and fire. The initial, immediate responsibility of meeting the bombers fell squarely on the fighter wings. Group commanders rallied their men in the air, forming attack groups designed to slice through the bomber boxes. Tactics had been refined over years. Frontal attacks against tight formations, daring diving slashes from above, and coordinated assaults meant to overwhelm the bomber gunners. Still, many Luftwaffe pilots knew, with a chilling certainty, that their ranks were thinning. Losses had been heavy over the past months, and replacements, often barely out of training, tragically lacked the experience and skill to survive prolonged, brutal battles against such overwhelming odds. The Americans, however, had learned hard lessons from earlier disasters. In previous raids, unescorted bombers had been savaged by the Luftwaffe, picked apart without mercy. But now, the P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts swept across the engagement zone with ruthless efficiency. Fighter groups flew not only defensive patrols, diligently guarding their charges, but aggressive hunting missions, tearing into German formations before they could even coordinate attacks. Mustangs, faster and more maneuverable than almost anything the Germans could field, pounced on interceptors before they could align for an attack, turning the tables on the once dominant Luftwaffe. They chased their opponents deep into German airspace, even strafing airfields and rail yards on their return, depriving the Luftwaffe of any chance to regroup or refuel for another pass. Over the skies of Magdeburg and Brunswick, the first furious clashes erupted, filling the air with weaving contrails and the staccato flashes of tracer fire, a deadly ballet of steel and courage. German ground observers, many of them civilians watching in horror, reported the scale of the engagement in tones of disbelief, their voices trembling over the crackling radio waves. Columns of black smoke marked where planes had fallen, burning wreckage tumbling toward the fields and forests below. For the Luftwaffe pilots, it was like flying into a storm of steel. Every approach to the bomber stream meant braving torrents of defensive fire, with gunners disciplined and relentless in their arcs, pouring out a ceaseless stream of 50 caliber bullets. Many Luftwaffe fighters never even reached firing range before being shredded by the agile American escorts. Yet, desperate and utterly committed to their mission, they pressed on. Some pilots, in acts of almost suicidal bravery, executed head-on charges, hurtling straight at the mass of bombers, guns blazing, gambling their lives in the desperate hope of breaking the formation, even if it meant certain death. Inside Berlin, the effect of the scramble was immediate and visceral. Sirens howled across the city, their mournful cry a chilling warning of what was to come, sending shivers down every spine. Civilian defense forces rushed to their posts, their movements practiced and efficient. Streets emptied in moments as thousands of people poured into underground shelters, clutching loved ones, their faces pale with terror. The city's civil defense network, drilled by months of relentless British night raids, operated with rigid efficiency, a testament to German organization even in the face of impending doom. Fire brigades prepared equipment, medical stations stocked supplies, and police directed civilians underground, their voices calm despite the palpable fear in the air. Yet the population understood with a sinking dread that this was not another night of bombs dropped in darkness. This was a daylight assault of unprecedented scale, an open, brazen act of war. And the sight of smoke pillars already rising in the distance, dark plumes against the blue sky, only heightened the fear that Berlin was about to endure its greatest, most brutal trial. In the air, the clash escalated into absolute chaos. American escorts broke into furious dogfights with Luftwaffe formations, spiraling and diving in deadly duels that scattered across the sky, leaving a tracery of contrails and the occasional flash of an explosion. For every German fighter that managed to slip through the vigilant escorts, the bombers unleashed a devastating curtain of fire, a wall of lead designed to tear apart anything that dared approach. Some German planes fell in flaming arcs, others plummeted silently, their wings sheared apart by concentrated fire, mere broken toys in the vastness of the sky. Still, enough fighters survived the gauntlet to launch attacks on the bomber stream, tearing into the formations with cannons and machine guns, their rounds ripping through aluminum and flesh. Casualties mounted on both sides, and the air grew littered with burning wreckage, parachutes, and debris, a horrifying rain of destruction. The road to Berlin was paid for with blood and fire, long before the city itself came into sight. By the time the first elements of the bomber stream reached the outskirts of Berlin, the city's formidable flak defenses were already alive with fire, a hellish welcome. Massive concrete towers, ugly and brutal, rose above the rooftops like medieval fortresses, each bristling with heavy anti-aircraft guns that pumped shells high into the morning sky. The famed 88s, notorious on every battlefield, were joined by larger calibers, fearsome weapons capable of tearing holes in steel at altitudes exceeding 20,000 feet. For Berliners huddled in shelters, the roar of artillery became an unending thunder, a cacophony that rattled walls and filled the air with the acrid smell of cordite and smoke. Above, the formations pressed on, their silver bodies glinting defiantly in the sunlight even as explosions rocked their ranks, visible shutters running through the aircraft. When the bomb bay doors opened, the city below became the stage for one of the most devastating spectacles of the entire war. Precision was the official doctrine, the promise of the Norden bomb site, but under such ferocious resistance and in the chaos of combat, bombs fell across a broad swath of the capital. Railway yards, vital munitions depots, and sprawling industrial complexes were the prime targets. But the reality of war is rarely so surgical. Entire neighborhoods suffered, as cascading strings of explosives leveled blocks of apartments and shops, turning homes into instant rubble. Witnesses on the ground, those who survived, recalled a sudden, terrifying dimming of daylight. The sun, obscured not by clouds but by the sheer, overwhelming density of aircraft overhead. A man-made eclipse. Moments later, the earth shook violently as delayed fuses ignited, throwing up geysers of dust, fire, and shattered masonry. A horrifying geological event. Among the specific targets struck were factories vital to Germany's war machine. Plants producing ball bearings, crucial aircraft components, and communications equipment lay squarely in the bomber's crosshairs. At Siemensstadt, massive workshops trembled as high explosives shattered machinery and tore through production halls. Rail junctions that carried precious coal, steel, and armaments into the city were hit, paralyzing critical supply routes. In Tempelhof and Tegel, airfields themselves came under bombardment, cratering runways and scattering aircraft, crippling their ability to launch counterattacks. The destruction was systematic, relentless, meant not only to weaken Berlin's industry, but to send an unmistakable, undeniable signal that even the heart of Hitler's empire was not beyond reach. For the civilian population, the experience was apocalyptic. Families huddled in basements, hearing the steady, terrifying whistle of falling bombs, followed by the deafening roar of detonation. The pressure waves from the explosions blew out windows and collapsed fragile buildings, burying victims beneath tons of rubble. Fire brigades struggled desperately to respond, their engines weaving through debris-strewn streets only to find entire districts already ablaze, an uncontrollable inferno. Incendiary clusters, specifically designed to ignite roof timbers and fuel reservoirs, spread flames faster than they could possibly be contained, turning the city into a sprawling bonfire. Columns of black smoke rose thousands of feet into the air, mingling with the contrails of the bombers above, creating a suffocating, terrifying canopy. Survivors later described the sky as a seething, churning canopy of fire and steel, a vision of hell on earth. Despite the onslaught, German propaganda, ever resilient, attempted to frame the event as proof of Berlin's unyielding resilience. Loudspeakers in public shelters blared patriotic messages, insisting with defiant fervor that the capital would withstand any enemy assault. Newspapers published outrageously exaggerated accounts of American losses, claiming the Luftwaffe had destroyed far more planes than reality. To the people living among the wreckage, however, the truth was brutally, terrifyingly obvious. The war had finally reached their doorsteps, in broad daylight, and there was no escape from its horrifying embrace. For the Luftwaffe, the cost was catastrophic. Dozens of irreplaceable fighters had been lost, and, even more critically, many of their most experienced pilots, the backbone of Germany's air defense, had not returned. Training new replacements took months, and by 1944, fuel shortages and rushed instruction meant that the quality of recruits declined sharply. Allied intelligence noted the shift with grim satisfaction. The once formidable Luftwaffe was bleeding to death, forced to fight battles it could not win, each daylight raid draining reserves that Germany desperately needed to defend other fronts. The long shadow of retreat, a perilous journey home. As the bombers completed their devastating runs over Berlin, unleashing their loads and leaving the city to convulse under fire, the battle in the skies intensified to a scale rarely seen in the entire air war. German fighters, unwilling to yield their capital without a furious, desperate struggle, launched wave after wave of counterattacks. Messerschmitt Bf on 10. Heavy fighters, some modified with upward-firing Schräge-Musik cannons, stalked the formations from below, attempting to blast bombers apart from their blind spots. Focke-Wulf FW 190s, the butcher birds, dove through the defensive curtain at terrifying speeds, hurling rockets and cannon fire into the densely packed formations. Some even carried aerial bombs, a terrifying innovation, meant to detonate within the tight American boxes, turning the sky itself into a brutal killing ground. The Americans, however, had learned hard lessons from earlier disasters. In previous raids, unescorted bombers had been savaged by the Luftwaffe. But now, the P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts swept across the engagement zone with ruthless efficiency. Fighter groups flew not only defensive patrols, meticulously guarding their charges, but aggressive hunting missions, tearing into German formations before they could even coordinate attacks. Mustangs chased their opponents deep into German airspace, relentlessly pursuing them, even strafing airfields and rail yards on their return, depriving the Luftwaffe of any chance to regroup. Over Berlin, the effect was dramatic. American escorts sliced into the interceptors before they could mount sustained assaults, turning the sky into a chaotic ballet of twisting contrails, cannon bursts, and falling wreckage. Within the bomber stream, gunners fought their own desperate battles. Waist gunners fired bursts into the blur of shapes hurtling past, often unsure whether their rounds found targets, while tail gunners tracked the relentless approaches of single-engine fighters creeping up from behind, their eyes straining, their hearts pounding. The air filled with tracer lines, red and green streaks arcing between the combatants, a deadly, beautiful light show. Some crews reported entire runs where their guns overheated from constant use, requiring frantic barrel changes mid-fight, a desperate, dangerous task under duress. In one squadron alone, more than 30,000 rounds of ammunition were expended before the bombers finally cleared Berlin's defenses. For the Luftwaffe, losses mounted rapidly. Experienced pilots, the backbone of Germany's air defense, fell one after another, either shot down by escorts or overwhelmed by the interlocking fields of bomber fire. Replacement pilots, often barely out of training, tragically lacked the skill to press home their attacks against such formidable defenses. In desperation, some units resorted to ramming tactics, a horrifying testament to their dwindling resources and shattered morale. A handful of fighters deliberately hurled themselves into the bomber formations, sacrificing aircraft and pilots in a desperate, futile attempt to bring down multiple enemies at once. Though horrifying to witness, these attacks underscored the Luftwaffe's growing desperation, a clear sign of their defeat. The cost for the Americans was heavy as well. dozens of bombers fell in flames, breaking apart under cannon fire or vanishing into blossoms of black smoke from direct flak hits. Parachutes, tragic white flowers, dotted the sky, each one a man drifting into captivity or death. For crews still airborne, the sight was seared into memory. Comrades who had eaten breakfast with them that morning now vanished within seconds, leaving an unfillable void. Yet, the stream maintained its integrity. The philosophy of mass formation, to rely on collective strength rather than individual survival, proved effective even as it demanded terrible sacrifices. On the ground, Berliners witnessed the duel above their city with a chilling mix of awe and dread. From streets choked with rubble, they watched as fighters spiraled in flames, some plunging into the very neighborhoods already ablaze from bombs. The air war, once an abstract notion heard in speeches or read in newspapers, now unfolded directly overhead, a brutal reality show. The capital was both battlefield and target, its fate determined by the outcome of the roaring conflict above. By the time the bombers began to turn westward, the Luftwaffe had thrown nearly everything it could into the fight. Hundreds of sorties had been flown, but the sheer magnitude of the American attack proved overwhelming. Berlin burned fiercely below, and in the air, the Germans had expended men and machines at a rate they could not afford to sustain. For the Allies, it was undeniable proof that the strategy of relentless pressure was working. The Luftwaffe was bleeding out in defense of its own skies, a slow, agonizing demise. As the bombers completed their runs over Berlin and began turning westward, the long and perilous journey home unfolded. The immediate danger of bombing runs was behind them, but retreating across hundreds of miles of hostile territory brought its own set of horrors. Damaged aircraft, riddled with holes from flak and fighter cannon fire, struggled valiantly to stay aloft. Engines sputtered. Leaking oil trailed behind wings like ominous black streamers, and control surfaces shivered uncontrollably with each movement of the stick. For many crews, survival now depended on coaxing crippled machines across the heart of Germany to the relative safety of the North Sea. Formation discipline, so rigid and vital during the bombing approach, now began to unravel as casualties mounted. Some aircraft lagged behind, unable to maintain altitude or speed, their vulnerability starkly apparent. These stragglers became easy prey for German fighters, still roaming the skies, diving onto isolated bombers like wolves chasing wounded prey. In one harrowing account, a single B-17, battered and bleeding, fought off repeated attacks from a dozen fighters, its crew firing until their guns overheated, their hands raw, before the flying fortress finally plunged in flames over farmland outside Hanover, a testament to their unwavering courage. Yet others displayed remarkable endurance. Severely damaged planes limped westward, crews manually cranking down landing gear, or tying control cables together with belts to keep flying. Their ingenuity and will to live almost unbelievable. The ordeal was made worse by the elements. At high altitude, freezing winds howled through ruptured fuselages where panels had been torn away by explosions. Men shivered violently in their oxygen masks, their gloves stiff with frost, lips split and bleeding from the cold and lack of moisture. Some gunners, wounded but refusing to abandon their posts, stayed at their stations, their hands bound to triggers, their eyes scanning the sky, their resolve unbreakable. Medics improvised bandages from parachute silk or tourniquets from headset cords, desperately trying to keep their comrades alive until they could reach friendly territory. For fighter escorts, the return was no less demanding. Mustangs and Thunderbolts extended their missions beyond planned fuel margins, staying with the most vulnerable bombers for as long as humanly possible, pushing their aircraft and their own limits. Pilots often risked not having enough fuel to make it back, diverting to emergency airstrips in England, or even ditching in the frigid waters of the Channel when their tanks ran dry. A terrifying gamble, yet their presence made the crucial difference. Luftwaffe attacks dwindled as escorts relentlessly hunted them down, ensuring that at least the core of the bomber stream could retreat relatively intact. On the ground in Germany, civilians watched the retreating formations with mixed feelings. Some cheered as smoking bombers fell, seeing in each falling plane a small, desperate reprieve from the destruction above. Others pitied the men parachuting into fields and villages, their ordeal written in the limp movements of their bodies drifting down under silk canopies, a vision of vulnerability. Farmers and soldiers rushed to capture survivors, many of whom were beaten by angry crowds before being handed over to the Wehrmacht. For the downed airmen, captivity in a German stalag was now their fate, a grim reward for surviving the inferno over Berlin, a testament to their survival instincts. As the coast finally came into view, a palpable wave of relief swept through the surviving crews. Crossing the line between Germany and the North Sea meant they had escaped the worst, though dangers still lurked. Flak ships patrolled harbors, and the long water crossing taxed already weakened planes. Some bombers, too damaged to make it, ditched in the frigid waters where rescue was uncertain, a chilling prospect. Others landed at emergency fields in England with only one or two engines still functioning, wheels collapsing on touchdown or wings snapping as they skidded to a halt, a desperate, controlled crash. Each successful landing was met with cheers from ground crews who had feared they would never see their comrades again, a moment of profound, shared relief. The return was as much a testament to endurance as the strike itself. For those who survived, the day became etched in memory, not only as the moment they struck Berlin, but as the moment they realized how thin the line between survival and death truly was. Every mile back had been contested, every moment a test of willpower, and for many, reaching England alive was the greatest victory of all, a second chance at life, the echoes of a turning point, legacy and lesson. When the surviving crews finally staggered back to their bases in England, the true scale of the sacrifice became devastatingly clear. One after another, battered bombers limped onto runways, their metal bodies scarred and broken. Some skidded to a halt with landing gear collapsed. Others trailed smoke until their engines gave out at the very edge of the field, their final breath exhaled. Ambulances rushed forward immediately, their sirens wailing, pulling bloodied men from shattered fuselages. Medics carried out the wounded on stretchers, their faces grim, while ground crews helped dazed survivors climb down from their planes, their movements slow and weary. For every bomber that returned, there were empty dispersal bays, silent and stark, where others should have been. The absences spoke louder than any words, a chilling testament to the cost of the mission. Dozens of crews had not come home. The mission's cost was staggering. Reports confirmed that more than 60 bombers had been lost outright, with hundreds more damaged, many beyond repair. Hundreds of airmen were dead, captured, or missing, their fates tragically uncertain. Fighter groups also reported losses, though their numbers were lighter compared to the bomber crew's horrific ordeal. Yet, despite the immense price, the raid had succeeded in a way that stunned both Allied commanders and German observers. Rail yards in Berlin lay in ruins, a tangled mess of twisted metal. Key factories had been hit hard, their production crippled, and entire districts were choked by fires, reduced to smoldering rubble. The psychological blow was even greater. For the first time, Berlin had suffered the full, unadulterated force of American daylight bombing, and the myth of the capital's invulnerability was shattered forever. Inside Berlin, the devastation was immense. Civil defense services struggled for days to bring order to the chaos. Water mains had been severed, making firefighting nearly impossible. Entire blocks smoldered in ruins, leaving thousands homeless, their lives shattered. Hospitals overflowed with wounded civilians and soldiers alike, while morgues filled to capacity, a grim accounting of the human cost. Yet, the Nazi regime, ever adept at manipulation, moved quickly to spin the disaster. Joseph Goebbels's propaganda machine broadcast defiant messages, insisting with fervent zeal that the damage was limited, and that Berliners remained unshaken, their spirit unbroken. Newspapers published outrageously exaggerated accounts of American losses, claiming the Luftwaffe had destroyed far more planes than reality. A blatant lie. To the people living among the wreckage, however, the truth was brutally obvious. The war had finally reached their doorsteps in daylight, and there was no escape from its horrifying embrace. For the Luftwaffe, the cost was catastrophic, a wound from which they would never truly recover. Dozens of irreplaceable fighters had been lost, and, even more critically, many of their most experienced pilots, the backbone of Germany's air defense, had not returned. Training new replacements took months, and by 1944, fuel shortages and rushed instruction meant that the quality of recruits declined sharply, a devastating blow to their combat effectiveness. Allied intelligence noted the shift with grim satisfaction. The once formidable Luftwaffe was bleeding to death, forced to fight battles it could not win, each daylight raid draining precious reserves that Germany desperately needed to defend other fronts. In the United States and Britain, the news of the raid spread rapidly, a wave of triumph mixed with solemnity. Newspapers heralded the operation as a turning point, celebrating the immense courage of the crews who had braved Berlin's formidable defenses. Photographs of returning bombers, their wings torn and fuselages riddled with holes, appeared in headlines across the Allied world, stark reminders of the price of victory. Families of the missing mourned quietly, their grief a private agony. Yet many found solace in the knowledge that their sons had struck at the very heart of the Reich, a blow against tyranny. Commanders pointed to the raid as undeniable proof that daylight strategic bombing was viable on the grandest scale, even against the most heavily defended target in Europe, a vindication of their costly strategy. The psychological impact reverberated far beyond the immediate battlefield. In occupied Europe, news of the Berlin raid spread like wildfire through underground networks, giving hope to resistance movements that the Allies were drawing closer to victory, that liberation was within reach. For ordinary Germans, however, it confirmed what many had long feared. The Reich was not invincible, and even its capital could burn, a chilling realization. Among Berliners, there was talk of apocalypse. Not just the physical destruction, but the profound, terrifying realization that the tide of war had turned irreversibly against them. The day had exacted a terrible cost in lives and machines. Yet it also decisively shifted the balance of air power. For the Allies, the destruction was not only in buildings but in the Luftwaffe itself, a formidable foe ground down by relentless combat, slowly but surely dying. For the Germans, it was a grim preview of what awaited in the months ahead, when the skies over their cities would grow darker still, and the attacks even more relentless. The legacy of the 1,000-bomber assault on Berlin was not measured only in the wreckage of that single day, but in the broader, irreversible trajectory of the war. For Allied planners, the raid confirmed that American daylight bombing, once questioned after disasters like the Schweinfurt-Regensburg missions, could indeed succeed on a monumental scale. The operation proved that with long-range escorts and overwhelming mass, bomber streams could penetrate even the most heavily defended skies in Europe. A critical tactical and strategic validation. It emboldened commanders to intensify the campaign, paving the way for the continuous hammering of German industry in the crucial months before D-Day. This wasn't just about destroying factories. It was about systematically dismantling the enemy's ability to wage war, piece by piece. For the Luftwaffe, the raid marked a turning point from which recovery was impossible. The losses of pilots on that day were irreplaceable. Many of the men shot down had years of combat experience, veterans of the Battle of Britain, North Africa, and the Eastern Front. Their deaths left squadrons depleted and forced the Luftwaffe to rely increasingly on undertrained youths with only a handful of flying hours, mere boys sent to their doom. The 1,000-bomber raid was not the sole cause of Germany's decline in the air, but it accelerated the process dramatically, pushing them past the point of no return. The Luftwaffe's once feared dominance was breaking apart, and German skies were becoming increasingly vulnerable to Allied air power. A stark reversal of fortune. The psychological consequences inside Germany were profound. Civilians who had endured years of night raids by the Royal Air Force now faced the chilling reality that no part of their daily lives was truly safe, even under the midday sun. The raid stripped away the illusion of distance, the comforting lie that the war was always somewhere else. It showed that American industry and manpower could deliver destruction at will, far beyond what the Reich could resist. The bombing of Berlin in broad daylight sent shockwaves through the German populace, creating an undercurrent of despair that Nazi propaganda, for all its bluster, could not erase. Even as Goebbels proclaimed resilience, the sight of burned-out neighborhoods and endless funeral processions told another, far more accurate story. Internationally, the raid was a powerful statement of Allied unity and strength. Newspapers in the United States trumpeted headlines about Berlin in flames, emphasizing the courage of airmen and the unstoppable tide of American might. In Britain, the mission was seen as a profound vindication of joint strategy, a powerful complement to the nightly pounding delivered by the RAF. In occupied countries, whispers of the raid passed from village to village, from resistance cell to resistance cell, offering hope that liberation was nearer than ever. The image of American bombers filling the skies above Hitler's capital became an enduring symbol that the Reich was no longer untouchable, that its defeat was inevitable. In the months that followed, the lessons learned over Berlin were applied repeatedly and ruthlessly. Massive raids became the norm, striking at oil refineries, transportation hubs, and synthetic fuel plants, systematically targeting the lifeblood of the German war economy. The Luftwaffe, unable to recover from its catastrophic losses, could only mount fragmented, desperate resistance. By the time the Allies launched Operation Overlord, the D-Day landings in June 1944, the skies over Western Europe were utterly dominated by American and British aircraft, ensuring that German forces faced overwhelming odds even before the first soldiers landed on the beaches. The Berlin raid was thus not an isolated spectacle, a standalone event, but a crucial part of a cumulative strategy that ensured German defeat, a vital step on the long road to Allied victory. Among the veterans who flew that day, memories lingered with haunting clarity, etched into their very souls. Some recalled the endless roar of engines that seemed to vibrate through their bones, a constant physical assault. Others remembered the flashes of fire from Berlin's defenses, the terrifying silhouettes of fighters diving at impossible angles, or the heartbreaking sight of entire formations swallowed in smoke, disappearing forever. Many lived with the faces of comrades who never returned, their laughter and camaraderie forever lost to the war. Yet they also carried a profound sense of having participated in history, not merely as warriors, but as witnesses to the moment when the balance of power in the air war shifted decisively, irreversibly. The enduring lesson, in the end, the day 1,000 American bombers darkened the skies over Berlin, became more than just a military operation. It was a turning point, a powerful symbol, and a chilling harbinger for Germany. It foreshadowed the relentless destruction that would continue until the Reich lay in ruins, a nation utterly broken. For the Allies, it was proof that their strategy of overwhelming force, coupled with technological superiority and unflinching courage, would carry them to ultimate victory. And for the world, it became a stark, unforgettable reminder of the extraordinary scale and profound human cost of modern war, when entire cities could be remade in fire and steel within the span of a few brutal hours. The enduring lesson from that day is complex and multi-layered. It is a testament to human courage in the face of unimaginable terror, to the relentless pursuit of strategic objectives despite horrifying losses, and to the industrial might that can shape the course of history. But it is also a somber reflection on the destructive capacity of humanity, the ethical dilemmas of total war, and the indelible scars left upon both the victors and the vanquished. It reminds us that behind every statistic, every mission report, every strategic analysis, lie the individual stories of men and women, their hopes, their fears, their sacrifices, and their unwavering, often terrifying resolve. These stories, these echoes of the past, compel us to remember the cost of conflict, and to strive for a future where such skies never darken again.